So where most people start, and where actually I started my home automation, was with lighting. And so this video is going to cover some ideas around lighting. In my particular instance, it was hue. And it will give you some food for thought as to where you might start and the other kind of considerations that you need. So there are many different offerings from different vendors for lighting. And actually, the one that you choose is almost going to depend on your budget and your ability to customize or do some work on your house in order to put this lighting in. So the very high end, there's things like Lutron. So Lutron, as far as I understand it, that's kind of like a rewire job. So you have specific cabling that goes around your house to your lights. And although it's a very kind of swish experience, it's also quite expensive. And more importantly, you're going to have to rip apart your house in order to put this in. And actually, if you're not sure whether you want to go down the route of home automation fully or not sure how far you're going to go, then actually Lutron might not be the right route to go. So for everyone else, there's two kind of ways that you want to consider putting in your home automation. So option one is actually controlling at the switch. So if you have a look on Amazon or anywhere else, there's a number of vendors that do lighting control at the switch. So you take your existing plate that you have on the wall, you take that off, you put this other switch on. It's probably a controller, remember, somewhere to control that. Could be your existing Alexa maybe. But that control is at the switch. So control at the switch is nice and easy to do. Usually means you can still operate the switch manually, so you can switch it on and off as well as through an app. And that's great, right? But it does mean there's a couple of restrictions, and it's not the route that I went down for that very reason. But if you want a quick fix, then maybe actually changing a switch is not a bad start. So the second place where you might decide to control the lighting is actually at the bulb itself. And so if you're going to look to control lighting at the bulb, there's a number of options you can go for. So LIFX or LIFX, I think that's how you say it. Hive is a good example I've seen of other people do, or Philips Hue. So Philips Hue is the route that I went down. So there's obvious kind of advantages to that. So actually you can change the brightness, although sometimes you can do that on the switch as well. But more importantly, you can change things like colour. And so Hue is a great example of where actually not only can I turn the bulb on and on, which I could do with the switch anyway, but I can change the colour of the bulb and the warmth of the bulb and the brightness. So actually the level of fidelity of change that you can make to the bulb is usually a lot higher when it's done at the bulb end rather than the home automation being done at the switch end. And so, as I said, Hue is the kind of route that I went down. So now that you've decided which route you're going to go down, whether it's going to be a bulb or it's going to be a switch, the next thing that you need to look at is actually which light am I going to go and automate. And so my suggestion is start with a bulb or a lamp, something similar that actually you switch on very rarely and actually is kind of on like a semi-automated schedule anyway. So an example of that might be the porch light that always comes on at sunset, or a lot of people seem to have like a lamp in the hallway or similar that they just have automatically come on, maybe with some sort of dial switch, or even worse, they kind of manually go and switch it on each evening. That's the best place I would say to start with home automation with regard to lights, because actually it's going to deliver you some value. You don't need to go switch the light on, but it's not going to affect anybody else in the house because they're not used to switching it on and off anyway, so they don't normally touch the lamp. So first place to start, find that lamp or that switch or that light that you very rarely switch on, automate it, set up a schedule, jobs are good. So you've automated your first light, well done. And now you're thinking, I want to go into other areas of the house. What should I automate next? And so my suggestion is go find a room that has one singular switch on the wall. And so this advice applies to those that have gone down the route, like I did, of having the control at the light switch, the light bulb, sorry, rather than the light switch. And so go find a room. So that could be like a downstairs cloakroom, i.e. downstairs toilet. Could be your living room, perhaps, somewhere like that, where actually it's okay to automate that light as well. And so the first thing you're going to do is put a tiny little piece of sellotape over the light switch. And the reason you want to do that is you want to put that light switch on, so the power's going to the bulb, because the bulb's going to decide when it comes on or not. And the little piece of tape stops people that are not used to having home automation when they come to your house switching on and off. So I used to find that the toilet was one of the next rooms that I did. People would come around my house, they'd switch the light on and off for the toilet, and from there on it kind of screw any home automation that I had. So disable that switch with a little piece of tape. And then at a later date you're going to take that switch off and you're going to put a blanking plate on, which is what I've done for quite a lot of the switches in my house. And so the next thing you've got to think is, okay, I've disabled the switch, how am I going to have that light come on? And so actually there will be some places that you decide to have a replacement dimmer or light switch that you're going to put in. So here you do a dimmer, for example. And so that dimmer enables you to do different settings for the lights, different kind of scenes. We'll go into that a little bit later. But that could be one way you do it. Actually, I think what you'll find first, which is what happened with me, is a motion sensor. And so in the toilet downstairs, or the cloakroom, whatever you want to call it, I have a motion sensor, so that when somebody walks into the bathroom, the cloakroom, the light automatically comes on. And so for that reason I don't really need a switch in there. And so that's a good example of a second place that you might decide to automate. Somewhere where you can disable the switch, you want the light to come on automatically, and that light's going to come on automatically using a motion sensor. So now that you've started with your first bulb in a lamp or a switch, you've done that. The next thing that you've moved on to is automating a room that has one switch for that whole room, so the toilet, for example. Now you need to think about where you're going to go next. So my recommendation is actually work on finding a room that has lights that you can automate all of them, but you kind of realise that there's actually one switch that controls multiple of those lights. So the example I have in our instance is actually downstairs in the hallway. We have a switch that does the hallway lights, but it also does the porch light outside as well. And so that was the third place I kind of started. And basically what I did was I automated both of those lights at the same time, knowing that both of them could be automated, right? So what I did is I took the blanking plate, the switch, removed that, put the blanking plate on instead, and then put a motion sensor on the front door, so that when somebody comes to the front door, the light comes on. That's all automated. I don't need a switch to switch it on and off. And also the hallway. So the hallway again has a motion sensor, and actually when someone walks into the hallway, it'll switch those lights on. And because both of those could be automated, both of those could be effectively set to on the switch all the time and automated through home automation, then that was the next kind of room that I could do. If you find that on that switch there is one switch that is actually controlling a part of the house that you wouldn't automate through a motion sensor, for example, then maybe you need to kind of wait and see what your options are there later. Or actually in my instance, there are some switches that I just haven't automated, or some lights I just haven't automated as well, because it's not the right thing to do. So you've automated a couple of lights in your house and you can switch them on from your phone or from your voice assistant. Great. So what now? It's cool, but it's no different maybe to what I was able to do before. I just don't need to get up and press the button. I can speak to a voice assistant instead. And so the thing that I did was actually try and think of some interesting or ingenious ways in which I could customize that light experience depending on what time it was or what I was doing, right? And so there's a couple of things that you want to look at. So if you're using something like Hue, you want to set up scenes. Scenes are different lighting scenes. And so, for example, we have one that in the morning, it puts all the lights on when I come down in the morning. But I also have a scene for the evening, and then we have one for the night time as well. And I'll go into a little bit more about why I've done that. Now, the thing that kind of controls it could either be, in my instance, the Hue app itself, or actually it could be something like IFTTT. If you get a chance, and I'll probably do a video on this later on, but have a look at ifttt.com, so ifthisthenThat.com. And ifttt.com, you can actually interact with your lights as long as it's on one of the supported platforms, and actually do some really funky things with your lights. So one example is for IFTTT, when I go for a run, which hasn't happened for a while, but when I do go for a run, I finish my run, it syncs to my phone, it uploads to Strava, and the second that happens, it turns one of the lights on in the kitchen orange. And that way, my wife, bless her, knows I've finished my run at the running club, and I'm probably on my way home then. And so she'll start to reheat the food that she's kind of made for me. So ifttt.com is well worth having a look at to give you kind of some inspiration, or recipes as they call them. Some inspiration as to what you could automate through your lighting. So the other area that you might want to look at is actually using motion sensors with scenes. Scenes is a piece of terminology that they use in Philips Hue, but there's actually another number of other vendors that use kind of like a similar terminology to describe a setting for lights, be that color, brightness, the color temperature, whatever it is. And so my example here is the kitchen. So I have 2 motion sensors in the kitchen, and so when I walk into the kitchen, the lights come on. That's good, but you know, to be honest, like if I had a normal house and I didn't have home automation in there, I could do that anyway, right? I could walk in the room, walk in the kitchen, switch on the light, job done. Actually, because it's home automation, I'm able to do some funkier stuff. So when I walk in that room, as I walk in the kitchen, the motion sensor tells the lights to come on. There's actually some extra intelligence it's going to use. So it sees what time it is. If it's the morning and it's dark enough, it'll switch the lights on. And so if I walk in the winter, it'll put those lights on for me, and I can walk around the kitchen, see what I'm doing, go and get myself some toast, sort my son's breakfast out, empty the dishwasher, whatever, right? However, now at the minute when I come in, because it's actually like springtime, soon summertime, when I walk in, there's no need for the lights to come on. So when I walk in, trigger the motion sensor, it checks the light levels, as in the ambient light levels, and just says, okay, we don't need to switch it on. Excellent stuff. Once it gets to the evening and it's dark enough, it's going to switch those lights on. And actually, in the evening, I don't want them to come on 100% brightness, because that's a bit kind of startling. I want them to come on, 50, 60, 70%. And so when past a certain time, so I think for me it's something like 7 o'clock, so when we normally put our son to bed, when I come back downstairs and walk in the kitchen, checks the ambient light, it's dark enough to put the lights on, switches the lights on, but now it's only put them on 70%. And so anyone who has kids and is used to getting their kids to sleep in the evening if they have to, they sit in a dark room, sing songs or nursery rhymes or read a book to their kids, and then eventually at some point their kid goes off to sleep. They walk downstairs, they go into the kitchen, they'd normally switch a light on and boom, right, their lights come on and kind of almost blind them. So the final area, and again this probably applies to people with kids, one would assume, or a cat or a dog that they need to let out at some point, is after something like midnight, when I go downstairs and I go into the kitchen. And that might be to go and warm a bottle of milk for our daughter, for example. When I go into the kitchen, if it's after midnight, it checks the ambient level. Yes, it's dark because it's nighttime. It'll switch 2 or 3 of the lights on in the kitchen, but only like 10-15%, and they're a little bit further away from me, thankfully enough. And so for me, that means when I go and do the milk run downstairs to heat some milk, I can kind of stagger about the kitchen. I don't get blinded by the lights. I walk out, about 3 minutes or so later, the lights switch off automatically. And so there are 3 examples of where actually you use scenes at different light settings, plus a piece of automation. And so the motion sensor that also has an ambient light sensor to know whether it's dark or light outside. To do something, to set a light setting, to set an experience for when you go in that room that you simply couldn't do if you were manually using a switch. And so for me, that at that point is where that home automation thing really comes into its own. So hopefully this video on lighting, and in this instance most of it hue lights for me, has been useful for you. And remember, when you're starting to do home automation at a bigger scale, lighting's probably going to be the first thing you do. So go find a light that currently gets switched on at the same time, doesn't get used much manually. So that's the porch light or a light in the corner of the room that you always switch on at night. That's the first one that you want to automate. Once you've done that, go find a room, maybe a toilet, maybe that porch light, maybe a hallway, somewhere where there's just one light switch that controls one set of lights. Put a blanking plate on it, automate it, use some motion sensors. Once you've done that, then go and find another set of lights, another set of light switches. Those light switches are the ones that you want to automate next, knowing that you're going to motion sensor probably all of them. And then finally, once you've got to that point, have a look at things like IFTTT, or have a look at the scenes and the options available in the vendor that you've gone for, to see actually can you do some really clever stuff by automating those lights and setting different scenes at different times of the day. Nice and bright when you wake up in the morning, a little bit dimmer in the afternoon or evening when it's dark, and 2 o'clock in the morning when you happen to be up and awake, just have the tiniest of lights come on so you don't blind yourself. I hope that's been useful, and thank you very much for joining.